Have you ever wondered how a simple priest, born in a small Spanish village, could transform 20th century Catholic spirituality and illuminate a path to holiness for millions of lay faithful? The life of Saint Josemaría Escrivá is a testament to God's ability to work wonders through humble instruments who surrender completely to His will. Founder of Opus Dei, God's work, Saint Josemaría revolutionized the understanding of the lay vocation in the Church, teaching that we are all called to holiness amidst our ordinary lives. Chapter 1. The Early Years. Josemaría Escrivá de Balaguer was born on January 9, 1902, in Barbastro, a small town in the province of Huesca, Spain. Son of José Escrivá and Dolores Albás, he grew up in a deeply Christian home where he learned the fundamentals of the Catholic faith from a young age. His parents, textile merchants, instilled in young Josemaría and his siblings a solid piety, teaching them to pray the rosary as a family and to participate devoutly in Holy Mass. The future saint's childhood was marked by painful trials that would temper his spirit. In a short period, God called 3 of his younger sisters to himself, an experience that plunged the family into deep sorrow. This early familiarity with suffering forged in young Josemaría an uncommon spiritual maturity, learning as a child to trust in divine providence even in the darkest moments. His school years were spent first at the Piarist school in Barbastro, where he received a solid academic and religious education. His teachers soon noticed the boy's bright intelligence and deep spiritual sensitivity. While not the top of his class, Josemaría showed a remarkable ability to grasp the essence of the teachings and a natural inclination toward religious matters that caught his professors' attention. Financial setbacks soon befell the Escrivá family. The family business failed, forcing the head of the household to seek new opportunities in Logroño. This move, though painful because it meant leaving behind friends and memories, proved providential in Josemaría's journey. In the Rioja capital during a harsh winter, the young man contemplated the footprints of a Carmelite monk's bare feet in the snow. That silent testimony of sacrifice and dedication awakened in his soul his first vocational unease. It was in Logroño that Josemaría began to sense that God had a special plan for him, though he didn't yet clearly understand what it was. His father, observing his son's inclinations, suggested he consider the priesthood, an idea that initially didn't appeal to the young man. However, the seed was planted, and little by little, the Lord watered it with His grace. By the time he finished his secondary education, Josemaría had matured internally and was beginning to open himself to the possibility of a total surrender to God through the priestly ministry. Chapter 2. The Divine Call. Josemaría's vocational discernment advanced decisively when in 1918 he decided to enter the Logroño Seminary. It wasn't a decision taken lightly or the result of an emotional outburst. Rather, it was the result of a long process of prayer and reflection. As he himself would confess years later, he became a priest to be available because he sensed that God wanted something from him, even though he didn't yet know exactly what. This unconditional openness to the divine will would be a constant throughout his life. His years of priestly formation continued at San Carlos Seminary in Zaragoza, where Josemaría stood out for his Eucharistic fervor and his love for the Virgin Mary. Simultaneously, on the advice of his superiors, he studied civil law at the University of Zaragoza, a background that would prove providential for his future mission. His seminary classmates remember his cheerful and sociable nature, his sincere piety without affectation, and his dedication to the study of theology and the sacred scriptures. On March 28, 1925, in the chapel of San Carlos Seminary, young Josemaría received priestly ordination at the hands of Bishop Miguel de los Santos Díaz Gómara. The joy of that day was marred by the absence of his father, who had died a few years earlier. However, his mother and siblings were able to accompany him on this solemn occasion. The new priest celebrated his first Mass in the Holy Chapel of Our Lady of the Pillar, placing his ministry under the maternal protection of the Virgin. His first years as a priest were spent in rural parishes of the Diocese of Zaragoza, where he carried out a simple but fruitful apostolate among peasants and humble people. Soon, however, he felt the need to further his studies and, with his bishop's permission, moved to Madrid in 1927. The Spanish capital would be the setting where God would finally reveal the mission for which he had been preparing him since childhood. In Madrid, while dedicating himself to the pastoral care of the sick and poor in the marginalized neighborhoods and hospitals, Josemaría continued to ask himself what God wanted from him. The answers began to come during his long hours of prayer before the Blessed Sacrament. The decisive moment occurred on October 2nd, 1928, the Feast of the Holy Guardian Angels, when, during a spiritual retreat, he saw Opus Dei, a path to sanctification in the midst of the world for people of all social conditions who sought union with God through their ordinary work and the fulfillment of their daily duties. Chapter 3. The Founding of Opus Dei. On that October 2nd, 1928, while the young priest Josemaría was engaged in spiritual exercises, God showed him clearly what he had been sensing in his soul for some time. He was to found an organization that would help ordinary people to seek holiness in the midst of the world, without having to abandon their professional occupations or their state of life. This divine inspiration, which he always attributed to God's grace and not to his own merits, would mark the beginning of Opus Dei and the start of a new chapter in the history of Catholic spirituality. The first steps were extremely difficult. Without financial resources, without experience, without influential contacts, Josemaría began his apostolic work among university students and young professionals in Madrid. His first center was a modest apartment on Martinez Campos Street, where he began to gather a small group of young people to speak to them about an ideal of Christian life in the midst of the world that was revolutionary for the time. He wasn't proposing anything new in terms of doctrine, but rather a rediscovery of the original message of the gospel, applied to the ordinary circumstances of life. The initial response was disheartening. Many didn't understand the message. Others found it too demanding, and some even suspected the orthodoxy of these teachings, which seemed to give an unusual prominence to the laity in the Church's mission. To support himself financially and continue his apostolate, St. Josemaría gave private lessons to students and served as chaplain to the nuns of the Patronato de Enfermos, where he also cared for numerous poor and sick people in the humblest neighborhoods of Madrid. Despite the difficulties, little by little, the first members of Opus Dei began to join the founder. Among them stand out Isidoro Zorzano, a classmate in Logroño, and Josemaría González Barredo, a young scientist. These first followers grasped the depth of the message and began to live it with enthusiasm, becoming invaluable collaborators in the initial expansion of the work of God. With them, St. Josemaría shared long hours of prayer, study, and apostolic planning, laying the spiritual and institutional foundations of what would become Opus Dei. The spiritual life that St. Josemaría proposed to these first members centered on fundamentally Catholic pillars: daily Holy Mass whenever possible, mental prayer, the recitation of the Holy Rosary, spiritual reading, discreet mortification, spiritual direction, and examination of conscience. What was truly new was not these traditional practices, but the spirit with which they were carried out and the objective they pursued, the sanctification of professional work and all ordinary duties, transformed into an occasion of encounter with God and service to others. Chapter 4. The Sanctification of Work. At the very heart of St. Josemaría's message lies a teaching revolutionary for its time: ordinary work performed with human perfection and offered to God. is a path to sanctification and apostolate. This doctrine, which today may seem common in the Church, was a true novelty in the 1930s, when holiness was mainly associated with consecrated states of life or with extraordinary religious practices. To sanctify work, to sanctify oneself in work, to sanctify with work, became the motto summarizing this spirituality. For Saint Josemaría, any honest work, from the humblest to the most prestigious, could and should be sanctified. The carpenter in his workshop, the mother of a family tending her home, the doctor caring for the sick, the teacher giving lessons, the engineer designing structures, all could find in their daily work a means to love God and serve others. This vision eliminated the false dichotomy between spiritual life and professional life, integrating them into a coherent and fruitful unity of life. The sanctification of work, according to the teachings of the founder of Opus Dei, required three fundamental aspects: performing it with the greatest possible human perfection, professional competence, offering it to God as prayer, supernatural sense, and orienting it to the service of others, charity. It wasn't simply a matter of praying while working, but of transforming the work itself into prayer through right intention and the effort to do it well. A poorly done job cannot be sanctified because it lacks love. And love is what gives meaning to sacrifice, he often repeated. With this doctrine, Saint Josemaría decisively contributed to the theology of the laity that would later be solemnly proclaimed by the Second Vatican Council. His insistence on the universal call to holiness and on the sanctifying value of ordinary work anticipated the conciliar teachings on the mission of the laity in the Church and in the world. It is no coincidence that Pope John Paul II, in the homily of canonization, called him the Saint of the Ordinary, recognizing his contribution to a deeper understanding of the Christian vocation. The fruits of this spirituality soon became visible in the lives of the first members of Opus Dei, competent professionals who strove to live their Christian faith exemplarily amidst their ordinary occupations, became living testimony that it is possible to be contemplative in the midst of the world. This silent but effective radiation of the gospel message in professional, university, and social environments constituted from the beginning one of the most notable characteristics of the apostolate of Opus Dei. Chapter 5. Years of Persecution. The outbreak of the Spanish Civil War in July 1936 marked the beginning of an especially painful period for Saint Josemaría and for the nascent work of God. The violent religious persecution unleashed in the Republican zone forced the young priest to take refuge in various hiding places to save his life. For months, he constantly changed his residence, private homes, the Honduran consulate, Dr. Sweel's clinic, and finally the women's asylum run by the Hospitalarias del Sagrado Corazón, where he remained hidden for several months, risking his life. In those extreme circumstances, Saint Josemaría demonstrated extraordinary courage and trust in God. Despite the constant danger, he continued to clandestinely exercise his priestly ministry. He celebrated Holy Mass in precarious conditions, administered the sacraments to other persecuted individuals, and kept the flame of faith alive through letters and furtive meetings with the members of Opus Dei who remained in Madrid. Those moments of trial, far from weakening his spirit, strengthened his determination and tempered his soul in the crucible of suffering. One of the most dramatic and at the same time providential episodes of this period was his flight from Madrid to the nationalist zone. Aware that his presence in the capital endangered not only his life, but also that of those who protected him, Saint Josemaría decided to cross the Pyrenees to reach the area where he could freely exercise his ministry. The dangerous journey through the mountains of Andorra in the midst of the winter of 1937, along with a small group that included his mother and some members of Opus Dei, constitutes one of the most heroic pages of his biography. Once in the nationalist zone, Saint Josemaría immediately resumed his apostolic work, first in Pamplona and then in Burgos. He reunited the members of Opus Dei scattered by the war and continued the formation of new vocations. In these difficult years, he wrote a large part of The Way, his best-known work, compiling thoughts and spiritual advice that he had been noting down over the years. This small book on spirituality, published in 1939, would eventually become one of the best-selling religious books of the 20th century, translated into countless languages. After the Civil War ended, the challenges didn't disappear. The return to Madrid marked the beginning of a new kind of persecution, more subtle but equally painful: misunderstanding and slander. Some ecclesiastical sectors, bewildered by the novelty of the message and the apostolic methods of Opus Dei, leveled unfounded accusations of heresy, secrecy, and even sectarian practices. Saint Josemaría endured these trials with evangelical patience, without responding to the offenses, and trusting that time and fidelity to the Church would bring the truth to light. "The truth will set you free," he repeated to his spiritual children, encouraging them to persevere in fidelity to their vocation despite the contradictions. Praise be to Jesus Christ. If this journey through the life of Saint Josemaría has inspired you so far, we'd love to hear about your experience. Share in the comments where in the world you're joining us from, and which aspects of the early chapters on his childhood, vocation, or the founding of Opus Dei have resonated most deeply in your heart. Were you impacted by the way he sanctified ordinary work, or perhaps his courage during the persecution? Your testimony will enrich our community of faith. May God bless you. Chapter 6. Universal Expansion. Despite the difficulties of post-war Spain and World War II, Opus Dei began to spread beyond Spain's borders. In 1943, with diocesan approval granted by the Bishop of Madrid, Monsignor Leopoldo Ejo y Garay, the work gained ecclesiastical recognition that would facilitate its growth. That same year, Saint Josemaría founded the Priestly Society of the Holy Cross, inseparably linked to Opus Dei, which would allow for the ordination of priests from among the lay faithful of the work, thus ensuring the specific pastoral care required by its spirit. Portugal was the first country outside of Spain where Opus Dei began its apostolic work. Soon followed by Italy and England, the founders' journeys and those of the first members to establish the work in these countries were marked by a scarcity of material resources, but abundant apostolic enthusiasm and trust in divine providence. In each new country, the same pattern repeated itself, starting with a small nucleus of people, usually students or young professionals, who assimilated the spirit of sanctification in ordinary life and transmitted it to their colleagues and friends. The expansion into the Americas was particularly significant. Mexico was the first American country where Opus Dei was established in 1948, quickly followed by the United States, Chile, Argentina, Colombia, and other countries on the continent. Saint Josemaría closely followed these developments from Rome, maintaining an extensive correspondence with the members who were beginning apostolic work in new territories. His letters, full of paternal encouragement and practical advice, were an essential link in maintaining unity of spirit despite geographical dispersion. A major milestone in this universal expansion was the arrival of the work in non-Christian countries or those with different religious traditions. The establishment of Opus Dei in Japan, the Philippines, Kenya, and other countries in Africa and Asia demonstrated that the message of sanctification of ordinary work had universal validity, adapting to diverse cultures and social circumstances. Saint Josemaría insisted that, while always respecting legitimate local traditions, The spirit of Opus Dei should remain identical in all countries as an expression of the unity and Catholicity of the Church. In just 2 decades, what had begun as a spiritual intuition in the heart of a young Spanish priest had become a reality present on 5 continents. Thousands of people of all races, social conditions and professions, men and women, young and old, found in the message of Opus Dei a path to fully live out their Christian vocation in the midst of the world. Saint Josemaría saw in this rapid expansion not a personal merit, but a divine confirmation of the authenticity of the charism received. And he frequently repeated, "This is God's work, not the work of a man." Chapter 7. Rome, center of the work. Saint Josemaria's definitive move to Rome in 1946 marked the beginning of a new stage in the history of Opus Dei. The Eternal City, seat of the papacy and heart of the Universal Church, also became the center from which the work would be directed. This decision clearly manifested the founder's desire to closely link his foundation with the Roman Pontiff and the Apostolic See, in a gesture of profound ecclesial communion. From his small apartment in Piazza di Città Leonina, a short distance from the Vatican, Saint Josemaría could contemplate every day the dome of St. Peter's, a symbol of the universality to which his apostolic work was called. The first years in Rome were a time of intense work to obtain the definitive pontifical approval of Opus Dei. The innovative nature of the institution, which did not fit into the existing legal categories of canon law at the time, posed serious challenges. Saint Josemaría, with his legal training and his profound knowledge of theology, worked tirelessly to find a solution that would preserve the essential features of the foundational charism within the normative framework of the Church. After lengthy negotiations and studies, on June 16, 1950, Pope Pius V granted definitive approval through the decree Primum Inter. This pontifical approval, however, was only a provisional solution. Saint Josemaría continued to seek the legal form that best suited the theological nature of Opus Dei as a path to sanctification in the midst of the world. The definitive inspiration came with the Second Vatican Council and its doctrine on the role of the laity in the Church. Based on these conciliar teachings, the founder proposed the creation of a new canonical figure, the personal prelature, which would finally materialize in 1982, shortly after his death, when John Paul II erected Opus Dei as the first personal prelature of the Church. From Rome, Saint Josemaría directed the formation and governance of the work throughout the world through intense epistolary activity and receiving visits from members from the most diverse countries. His office in Villa Tevere, the central headquarters of Opus Dei, was a meeting point where news, consultations, and projects from 5 continents converged. With patience and wisdom, Saint Josemaría Escrivá addressed doubts, offered guidance, and encouraged apostolic initiatives adapted to diverse cultural and social realities. Villa Tevere, built with great economic and personal sacrifices during the 1950s, became not only the administrative center, but also the spiritual heart of Opus Dei. Saint Josemaría personally oversaw every detail of this building, especially its oratories and places of worship, the Father's Oratory, the Virgin's Crypt, and the Pentecost Tabernacle became privileged spaces for prayer, where the founder spent long hours in intimate dialogue with God, interceding for his spiritual children scattered throughout the world, and for the Universal Church, to whose service he had dedicated his entire life. Chapter 8. The Father of the Family. One of the most distinctive characteristics of Saint Josemaría's personality was his deep sense of spiritual fatherhood. For the members of Opus Dei, he was simply the Father, a title that expressed not a hierarchy of power, but a relationship of love, dedication, and service. Aware that God had chosen him to beget spiritual children, he embraced this responsibility with total dedication, living firsthand what he himself taught, to dedicate oneself to the service of souls without thinking of oneself. Saint Josemaria's paternal love manifested itself above all in his constant prayer for each of his spiritual children. He spent many hours on his knees before the Blessed Sacrament, offering his sacrifices and mortifications for the apostolic fruits of Opus Dei throughout the world. He had a special concern for members who were ill or facing personal or professional difficulties. He was often seen writing names on small notes that he placed next to the altar during the celebration of Holy Mass, to keep those who most needed divine help present in the Holy Sacrifice. Correspondence was one of the main means through which he exercised this fatherhood, especially with those who were far from Rome. His letters, often dictated in the early hours of the morning after Mass, combined doctrinal firmness with the most tender affection, spiritual demands with understanding of human weaknesses. Many kept these letters as true spiritual treasures, rereading them in times of difficulty to find light and comfort. "I keep you very much in my prayers," was a phrase he repeated sincerely, manifesting his constant intercession for each one. Informal gatherings or meetings were another essential element of his formative work, both in Rome and on his travels to various countries. Saint Josemaría dedicated long hours to these meetings, where, in a familiar and relaxed atmosphere, he answered the most varied questions about doctrinal, ascetic, apostolic, or simply human aspects of Christian life. His extraordinary ability to adapt language and examples to his audience allowed him to connect with people of very different ages, cultures, and levels of education, always conveying the demands of the gospel with clarity and conviction. Those who had the good fortune to meet him personally agree in highlighting his extraordinary capacity for listening and attention to each person. Despite his multiple responsibilities and the pressure of time, when he attended to someone, it seemed as if he had no other concern in the world. This personal attention, coupled with his keen psychological intuition and the supernatural light he received in prayer, allowed him to get to the bottom of problems and offer the most appropriate advice for each situation. Like a good father, he knew how to be demanding when necessary, but always with an underlying compassion and mercy that reflected God's fatherhood. Chapter 9, Spiritual Writings, Saint Josemaria's literary production, although not very extensive in number of titles, has had an extraordinary spiritual influence on millions of people inside and outside Opus Dei. His best-known work, The Way, first published in 1939, brings together 999 points or spiritual maxims that condense his experience as a director of souls and founder. Written in a direct, incisive, and often provocative style, The Way has been translated into more than 50 languages and has sold millions of copies, becoming one of the classics of 20th century Christian spirituality. Its reading, recommended by numerous bishops and spiritual directors, has provoked countless conversions and strengthened priestly and religious vocations throughout the world. Holy Rosary, written in 1934, is a poetic and profound meditation on the mysteries of the Rosary that reveals the author's intense Marian devotion. In simple yet beautiful language, Saint Josemaría invites the reader to contemplate the gospel scenes through Mary's eyes, participating with the heart in the decisive moments of salvation history. This small book has helped revitalize the practice of this traditional Catholic devotion, presenting it not as a mechanical repetition of prayers, but as a genuine contemplative dialogue with Christ through his Blessed Mother. Christ is Passing By, and Friends of God compile homilies delivered by Saint Josemaría on various liturgical feasts and pastoral occasions. They reveal his profound knowledge of sacred scripture and the tradition of the Church, as well as his ability to make the highest truths of faith accessible through examples taken from everyday life. These texts constitute a true catechesis on the foundations of Christian life: divine filiation, God's presence in the ordinary, the sanctifying value of work, the apostolic mission of the laity, the universal call to holiness, and many other central themes of his preaching. In addition to these works, published during the author's lifetime, others have been published after his death that collect his oral preaching. Furrow and The Forge follow the format of short points already used in The Way, delving into specific aspects of spiritual and apostolic life. Conversations with Monseigneur Escrivá de Balaguer brings together interviews given to various media, where the founder of Opus Dei answers questions related to the mission of the work, the situation of the post-conciliar church, and various topics of social and religious current events. These texts allow us to appreciate his profoundly supernatural vision of historical events and his unwavering fidelity to the magisterium of the Church. The collection of these writings constitutes a coherent doctrinal body that develops what we might call a theology of ordinary life. Saint Josemaría Escrivá, a life of faith and service, without academic pretensions or displays of erudition, but with an undeniable theological soundness. Saint Josemaría articulates an understanding of Christian existence centered on experiencing divine filiation amidst ordinary occupations, sanctifying work, family life, social relationships, and all the circumstances that make up the fabric of human existence. This spirituality, officially recognized by the Church with his canonization, represents one of the most significant contributions to the renewal of Christian life in our time. Chapter 10. The Final Days. The final years of St. Josemaria's earthly life were marked by intense apostolic activity, despite the progressive deterioration of his health. Between 1970 and 1975, he undertook several pastoral trips throughout Spain, Portugal, Mexico, South America, and other countries, maintaining numerous meetings with members of Opus Dei, priests, religious, bishops, and people from all walks of life. In these massive gatherings, known as tertulias, the founder responded with evangelical simplicity and theological depth to a wide variety of questions about faith, Christian life, the problems of the contemporary church, and the mission of the laity in the world. These meetings were true catecheses that showed the spiritual vitality of the founder and his concern to faithfully transmit the charism he had received from God. On these apostolic journeys, St. Josemaría had to overcome various physical ailments that had plagued him for years. Heart problems, diabetes, and other conditions caused frequent discomfort, which he endured with supernatural fortitude, without complaint, and without allowing them to interfere with his pastoral work. His closest collaborators were amazed by his ability to maintain an exhausting work pace despite these ailments, always maintaining the smile and good humor that characterized him. His personal motto, "To serve is to reign," found its most authentic expression in these moments of physical suffering. Concern for the situation of the post-conciliar church occupied a large part of his thoughts and prayers in these final years. Always faithful to the magisterium and deeply identified with the spirit of the Second Vatican Council, he suffered to see the erroneous interpretations that some made of the conciliar teachings, unauthorized liturgical experiments, doctrinal deviations, and the abandonment of ecclesiastical discipline that occurred in certain sectors caused him immense pain. However, instead of falling into sterile criticism, he intensified his prayer for the Pope and the bishops, and encouraged the members of Opus Dei to live their Christian vocation with greater fidelity as a testament of love for the Church. On June 26, 1975, after celebrating Holy Mass as every morning, St. Josemaría felt unwell while working in his office at Villa Tevere, A sudden heart attack ended his earthly life at 12:30 p.m. The news spread rapidly through Rome and then throughout the world, causing a wave of sorrow among the thousands of people who had found in his teachings a path to holiness. His mortal remains were displayed in the oratory of Our Lady of Peace, at the headquarters of Opus Dei, where thousands of people came to pray and bid a final farewell to the Father. Testimonies consistently highlighted the serene expression on his face, a reflection of a life totally dedicated to God and others. The funeral, presided over by Cardinal Paletti, Vicar of Rome, brought together numerous cardinals, bishops, priests, and faithful from many different countries. The words of the main celebrant summarize the general feeling. A saint has died. He was buried in the crypt of the oratory of the Opus Dei delegation in Rome, under the altar dedicated to Saint Mary Queen. There, at the feet of the Virgin whom he had so loved, rested the body of the founder, while his soul already enjoyed the beatific vision, according to the confident hope of those who had known and treated him in life. Chapter 11. The Path to the Altars. The reputation for holiness that Saint Josemaría had enjoyed during his lifetime spread rapidly after his death. Testimonies of graces and favors attributed to his intercession began to arrive from all over the world. This spontaneous current of popular devotion, combined with the widespread conviction about the heroism of his virtues, led the prelate of Opus Dei, Monsignor Álvaro del Portillo, to initiate the procedures for the cause of beatification and canonization. As soon as the minimum time established by canon law had elapsed, the diocesan process opened in Madrid and Rome in 1981 under the pontificate of John Paul II. During this phase, thousands of testimonies were gathered from people who had known the founder of Opus Dei. The documentary material gathered was impressive. Letters, personal writings, recordings of his sermons, photographs, and other materials that illustrated the different stages of his life. All this material, along with the statements of the witnesses, provided the courts with a complete and detailed vision of the human and supernatural personality of the servant of God, Josemaría Escrivá. Simultaneously, extraordinary healings attributed to his intercession, which could constitute the miracles required for beatification and canonization, were investigated with scientific rigor. Doctors and specialists of internationally recognized prestige, believers and non-believers, examined these cases applying the strictest criteria of medical science. Among the cases studied, the inexplicable cure of the Carmelite nun of charity, Sister Concepción Bulón Rubio, stands out, who, after suffering a serious illness that doctors had declared incurable, was instantly and completely healed after invoking the intercession of the founder of Opus Dei. On May 17, 1992, in a solemn ceremony in St. Peter's Square, packed with faithful from 5 continents, Pope John Paul II beatified Josemaría Escrivá. In his homily, the Holy Father highlighted the timeliness of the message of the new blessed. With supernatural intuition, Blessed Josemaría tirelessly preached the universal call to holiness and apostolate. Christ calls everyone to sanctify themselves in the reality of daily life. Therefore, work is also a means of personal sanctification and apostolate when lived in union with Jesus Christ. These pontifical words confirmed the full harmony between the teachings of the founder of Opus Dei and the doctrine of the Second Vatican Council on the vocation of the laity in the Church. Following his beatification, a period of intense popular devotion began, marked by numerous reported favors attributed to Blessed Josemaría's intercession. One particularly striking instance involved Dr. Manuel Nevado Rey, a Spanish physician suffering from chronic radiodermatitis, with cancerous lesions deemed incurable by leading specialists. After praying devoutly before an image of Blessed Josemaría, he experienced a complete and lasting healing. a recovery that baffled medical science. This case, meticulously investigated by the Congregation for the Causes of Saints, was accepted as the miracle necessary for canonization. On October 6, 2002, just 10 years after his beatification, Pope John Paul II solemnly enrolled Josemaría Escrivá in the catalogue of saints of the Catholic Church. Over 300,000 people flocked to St. Peter's Square, a testament to the profound impact of his life and message. During the ceremony, the Pope underscored the enduring relevance of the new saint's teachings. He described Saint Josemaría as someone chosen by the Lord to proclaim the universal call to holiness, to show that everyday tasks, ordinary activities, are a path to sanctification. He was, the Pope declared, the saint of the ordinary. The remarkable speed of the entire process, from death to canonization, is one of the most expedited in recent church history, comparable only to that of Saint Teresa of Calcutta or Saint John Paul II. It reflects the widespread belief in the exemplary nature of his life and the timeless significance of his message for the contemporary world. Chapter 12. A Prayer to Saint Josemaría, O God. Through the intercession of the Blessed Virgin Mary, you chose Saint Josemaría Escrivá, a priest, to found Opus Dei, a path to holiness through professional work and the fulfillment of the ordinary duties of a Christian. Grant that I, too, may learn to transform every moment and circumstance of my life into an opportunity to love you and to serve with joy and simplicity the Church, the Roman Pontiff, and souls, illuminating the pathways of the earth with the light of faith and love. Saint Josemaría, Father and Teacher, you who taught us to find God in the midst of our daily occupations, help us to recognize the greatness of our Christian vocation, living each instant with a spirit of service, with a love for truth, and with a yearning for holiness. You who traversed the path of ordinary life with extraordinary love, teach us to transform the commonplace into an offering pleasing to God. Intercede for us before the Lord, that we may discover His divine will in every moment of our existence, that in our professional work, our family life, our social relationships, and in all our activities, we may always seek Christian perfection, doing all things for the love of God and our neighbor. As you taught, may we learn to work with order, perseverance, human excellence, and a supernatural spirit. Help us to live a true unity of life, being contemplative in the midst of the world, finding God in the most ordinary realities. May we learn to transform our work into prayer, our difficulties into sacrifices pleasing to God, and our joys into acts of thanksgiving. May we always live as true children of God, experiencing the joy of divine filiation that you so eloquently proclaimed. Saint Josemaría, you who love the Church and the Pope so deeply, teach us to live this same love in all circumstances. Obtain for us from God the graces we need to faithfully fulfill our mission in the world, being apostles in our professional and social environments, bringing Christ to every corner of society. Amen.